JP Nerbun, welcome to the Mindset Advantage podcast, man. It's a joy to have you here today. I'm really excited for today's topic.
Well, I'm pumped, man. I really like your sign in the background there, the stay curious. So absolutely love that. So yeah, but I'll try to stay curious as well during this interview.
Awesome, man. I'm such a believer in curiosity being a superpower, whether it's you're a coach, athlete, or a parent. I just think it's something that I stand by really closely, and it's on all my shirts and all my gear because I just think people need to be more curious. But enough about me. You have an incredible book, couple of great books out. The one that really caught my eye online is called The Sports Parent Solution: Proven Strategies for Transforming Parents from Obstacles to Allies. This title just caught my eye, and I needed to buy the book and learn a little bit more about it because unfortunately, as we were talking a little bit off air, unfortunately, sometimes the parents ruin it for the kids, and sometimes they don't even know what they're doing. And so to give them a little bit of a framework, a book, and some strategies today, I think would be monumental. But before we get into some of the strategies, JP, why this book and why right now?
Well, they don't just ruin it for the kids; they ruin it for the coaches sometimes too, right? So, I mean, I think it's been a big issue. I coach coaches, I support coaches in their work, and my role as a leadership coach has been to walk through at certain points some really tough moments in coaching that have revolved around parent issues. So it's been something that's been at the focal point of my work with coaches for the last 7 years, and I all experienced a lot of these challenges for the 15 years that I was in coaching as a high school and youth coach, and I coached internationally as well too. So it's been a big part of that. But one thing that I'll share, one story I'll share with you is just that right after I'd written my second book, The Culture System, in that book at the end of it, I talk about this really challenging moment in coaching when I committed to transformational leadership. And a few parents just rejected that. They rejected that shift, and they weren't happy with, their sons being held accountable. They weren't happy with the losing that we were going through a tough season at the time. And I had a parent really altercation in that season that really stuck with me even to this day. It was really tough, and that parent never apologized, even though that parent I had known for years and coached their son and loved their son and tried to, did my best to show great respect, and yet that parent never apologized for that day. And I still remembered it. And yet here I am, 6, 7 years out. I just published my second book, The Culture System, where I kind of tell a little bit of that story. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, I get a random text from this dad. Haven't heard from him in all those years. And he just says, Coach Nerbun, just want to let you know that anytime me and my friends talk about sports and we're talking about our kids' coaches, I always say, you were the best coach my son ever had. In fact, it wasn't just because you were tough and kind and firm with him, you were with me as well, but also just the way that you led him impacted me as a parent. And my son was going through, a stage of becoming an adolescence, a young man, and you really helped me be a better dad for him. And that blew me away. And so that really inspired me to get after it, write this book, because I'm like, man, if we can get this right, not only can we eliminate or really minimize our parent issues and problems in our program, but we can have a greater impact on our athletes, as well as we can honestly impact the parent themselves. And that potentially helps them become better parents. It helps them be closer, and have better relationships with their own children.
That's awesome. I'll ask just a general question, JP. I've heard you on a couple podcasts, so you get a lot of emails from coaches asking for help. Just generally speaking, before we get into some of the strategies here, what do you think is the common 1 to 2 most common emails you're receiving? I need help on this when it comes to the coach and the parents. What's the most common issue you're seeing?
Yeah, the most common is typically around the role not being what parents have expected it to be, is kind of like the front issue. Like that's what it looks to be as the problem. That's probably the playing time, the role, those, that type of thing. And the second big one has to do more with you know around the level of accountability that a coach might be having, and with the coaches I work with, those two things often go hand in hand, because the role is not what they want, because coaches are holding, the athlete to a different, to a high standard. So those often go hand in hand. And, it's amazing. Some people say, well, I'm losing, and that's why I have parent problems. I just had a coach there today that reached out, and he's winning. And he got an anonymous letter from a parent that was ripping him for, oh, well, you think you're a good coach because you're winning, but, and then just, proceeds to give out to the coach for 3 paragraphs about, all about the roles and the playing time. So even if you win, you're not saved from these parent issues. That's probably, those are the 2 biggest things that we're hearing. And I think underneath that, is the real issue. The root of the issue, though, is oftentimes a lack of transparency, a lack of understanding what our coaches, because our coaches that I work with, like they coaches I work with, they do a really good job of communicating the role and the playing time to the player. Sometimes the parents aren't always, hearing that or seeing that.
Yeah, that's where I wanted to go today a little bit, was because that's what I'm seeing in my line too, is playing time. And the older you get, I feel like it's a little bit less about trying to make sure everybody plays the same, right? When you're younger, sure, we keep kind of track, everybody's playing the same. Once you kind of get into high school, that rule is kind of out the window. So can we take it a layer deeper here, JP? What are the strategies to effectively determine and communicate and then support those player roles? What are some of those strategies you're helping coaches with? Because I think I agree in my line as well. It's the playing time.
Well, there's many factors that really make this difficult for parents. One is that there's also this transition, like you just alluded to, which is everybody plays to all of a sudden not everybody plays. And we as organizations and coaches don't do a great job of communicating, saying, hey, okay, we're now under 14s and not everybody's going to play, right? Like that, or we're moving to a place where we're going to be factoring a little bit more about winning. And that's a really tough situation. When do you make that shift? We don't do a good job communicating it. We don't even do a good job of knowing that ourselves. And so, us as coaches, we have to know, what are our factors for deciding playing time? Are we going for the win, or are we going for development? And you can be about both, but at certain points, you're going to have to make a decision here. We're going to play everyone. Everyone's going to get a chance to develop, or we're going to go for the win. And for the youth level, it could be just equal playing time across the board. But all of a sudden, you start to get under 12s, 13, 14. You might shift to, hey, we're about everybody gets a quarter. Fourth quarter, we're about the win, or whatever the sport is. Depends, right? So you start to shift in that approach. So, but at some point, you're at the highly competitive level. But even then, another big issue is that coaches say, I want guys that work hard, have a good attitude. We talk about these things that we value as coaches, and yet who plays? The guys that help us win. That's not a bad thing. I'm not criticizing coaches for doing that. That's for some of us, that's the reality of our jobs. Except, don't tell parents, don't tell athletes, like, well, we care about this, and this is the people that we're going to play, and then not go out and do it, right? So you have to have in your program a minimum standard. And this is what I talk to a lot of coaches about. I talk about simultaneous thresholds. The first threshold to play in our program is you need to meet the minimum standards. We talk about the ABCs. It's academic, it's behavioral, and cultural, right? So you got to be making the academic standards in a lot of schools, the behavioral things, that, off the field or off the court, and then the cultural standards when it comes to just how you practice and stuff. Now, if a player is not above the line on those things, if they're, below the line, they should know, right? There shouldn't be like any mystery around it. In fact, if a player is not working hard in practice, you should have addressed it in those situations. You don't wait till Friday to go, actually, you're not going to play tonight because you haven't been practicing hard all week. Like, whoa. Like you should have addressed it in practice. So I wrote a lot about that in my book, The Culture System. But anyway, so you got these simultaneous thresholds. The first threshold is to be eligible to play, you have to meet our, these ABCs of standards. And then it's all about performance. Now, this is key, because all of a sudden you're saying, well, it's not, being the hardest worker doesn't guarantee you playing time over this guy because he doesn't work as hard, right? And that's where a lot of players and parents get confused. It's like, well, my son attended all the off-season workouts. My son did this, or my daughter did this. And it's like, that's great, but this person over here happens just to be more naturally talented. That's life. That's the reality. And this person over here meets the minimum standard here. So we got to get better and more clear around how do we determine that playing time. Once we do that, then we have to be more proactive in communicating it. And I know I'm running along here, but give me two more real important points. So how do you determine playing time, communicate that, and then how do you communicate playing time throughout the year? Two big things I would say here that we screw up on as coaches is we don't communicate it. we communicate it like the team walks in and it's like, okay, this is who's starting tonight. It's like, and then all of a sudden this kid's having this emotional response and he's losing his mind on the sideline. It's like, I can't believe him. He's so selfish. It's like, well, you literally just told that kid there and he's feeling something. He's hurting, right? And we haven't given them time or space to reset themselves. Or, we don't tell them at all. And they just sit there on the edge of the bench. They're going, am I going to get in today? Am I going to get in today? And the fear of the unknown, it's one of the biggest triggers in stress and anxiety. So here you have that issue. So you have to communicate early. You have to be really, really, really transparent and about that. And so we have a lot of, different things that I talk about in my work with coaches around how to do that. But it's really important that we're communicating that. And we really try to work with a parent situation is making sure that there's some transparency so the parent knows this conversation's been having. So if coaches are having these one-on-ones with players, during the week, in the weekly email that goes out to parents, you might say, hey, just so you know, we're having real conversations with all the players this week. The position coaches or whoever coaches are meeting with the players. They're going to let them know how many minutes we anticipate them to play. There's obviously no guarantees, but we want every player to know kind of what we're about here. So we some coaches, they might even do one-on-ones with players and then share what we call our player development plans with the parents. The parents see, oh, this is Johnny's role defined here on the PDP. So we have different ways of doing that, but we like to have transparency to the player. And then we always say like the 24-hour rule, 24 hours in advance of the game, if at all possible. Not always possible, but if possible, and then make sure there's also the parent knows the conversation's at least been had, and maybe even what was said.
Oh man, there's a lot of good stuff in there, JP. There's two words that pop up a couple times: transparency and communication. In my work as a consultant, what I'm finding, I do a mid-season survey with teams that I'm working with, and one of the things I ask on the question is on the survey is, what would you like to see more of from your coach, or how can your coach best support you during the second half of the season? And by far, the most consistent theme that I'm seeing in the first time doing this is more communication and more transparency. And it seems to me like these kids, again, I work with more high school, junior varsity, and varsity levels, that they're kind of at this level where it's like, look, I don't want to be lied to. Just be transparent with me. If I'm not going to play tonight, tell me. If I'm on the butt, like, just tell me where I'm at. I'd rather be on that side than have to wonder, like, what's coach thinking about me? So I'd love to dive in a little bit more on how can coaches be more transparent? How can they communicate more? It's also funny because I show the survey to some of the coaches, and sometimes they're like, oh my gosh, all we do is communicate with these kids. All day we're communicating. But I think there's a difference between communicating X's and O's of basketball and communicating of, let's sit down and have a one-on-one conversation. So talk to me a little bit more about communication and transparency, because that really hit a aha moment for me.
Yeah, three things I'll give you. The first thing that coaches do wrong is they get upset at players' emotions. I just talked to a college ice hockey coach I work with, and he had to scratch a few players because they carry a big roster in hockey, but and not everybody gets to dress. And so he scratched a few guys, and this one guy was upset, and it's like, that's okay. Like we need to let our players feel upset. I think we can bring attention to their emotions and be like, hey, what's going on for you? What are you feeling right now? But just be understandable. I get it. It's disappointing. You just got scratched. You're a fifth year senior and you just got scratched from the team, and we're on an absolute, win streak and things are going great and you want to be out there. I get it. But what's our expectation on how you respond? Right. And so you can demand the response, have a standard response, but to just expect our players just to roll over and say, okay, that's okay. Like, I don't want players like that. I want players that want to play. Right. So first off, don't get upset about that. Communicate it. Don't sugarcoat it too. Like, I think so often coaches want to sugarcoat it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the thing. We say, I don't want to break their spirit. I don't want, them to feel like they got no chance. I'm like, dude, like, end of the day, coaches, just be honest with them, tell them where you're at. And if they get ticked off at you, then they get to have, here's another response, is I always try to encourage coaches to communicate. It's like, you have two responses. You can either go out there and you can go to try to prove me wrong, And we know about those guys. We know about the Steph Currys. We know about the Michael Jordans, where they were told they weren't that good, right? You know who we don't know about? We don't know about the guys that chose the other response. The other response was they don't believe I'm any good, and then we just quit and we just give up and we throw in the towel. So go be the, you choose your response here, but like really encouraging that response. I think another thing that coaches can do is we can document this. I personally was coaching a pro team 3 years ago during COVID in European basketball, and we would document on our player development plans, the areas of growth, their commitments to growth, our commitments to support them, and then when there's this fourth one, which is role. And I specifically said, player X, you are 6 through 8, which means you could come off the bench first, or you could be the third to come off the bench. It depends, depends on the night. Well, I had a one-on-one with the player. I screenshot the one-on-one PDP and sent it back to the player. And I think we're all on agreement here. And the player comes back to me like, actually, coach, I'm not really happy with that. I want to have another conversation. Like, great. We sit down. Why 6, 7, 8? I said, well, listen, if I need offense, I'm going to you. If I need defense, I'm going to this player. If I need the ball to move, I'm going to this player. That's just kind of my thinking. Okay, gotcha, coach. So that is huge. Documenting it, sending it to them so it's really clear and written down. That could be a way to help those coaches with the transparency. And lastly, anytime you make changes in your lineup, significant changes, we like a 30-second Google form they can fill out. It says, how many minutes do you expect to play? I like to say the first half. Every sport differs. Like in basketball, it's like the first half. My whole thing is like, second half of basketball, I don't know how many minutes people are going to play, right? Like I'm going off the field. Like, so, but however, just how many minutes do you expect to play? Give them like 5 or 6 options in a range of minutes. And then, maybe a second question of like, what is your role tonight? How do you going to support the team or something like that? But then you go and you get all these responses and you can literally go through all the names and go, okay, player X thinks they're playing this many minutes. Yep. We think okay, they're around the right thing. But then you can really find maybe 2 or 3 players that are like, they think they're playing all these minutes, and you're like, no way they're playing those many minutes. Like, and you can go and seek them out and say, hey, we got to have a conversation because you're not going to play tomorrow night, right? Like you think you're playing 20, you might see 5. So here you're able to really just try to identify where those players are not hearing you and get to them and figure that and fix that.
That's great. You talk about in your book and just here today about how important it is to have these one-on-ones. And some of the best teams, they're scheduling these one-on-ones. It's very routine, right? But then there's other organizations out there, other coaches listening right now that go, I haven't done a one-on-one all year. Or maybe it's really informal. It's like, hey, how's it going? Can you talk to me about your process from the best teams you've been around, about what it means to have one-on-ones? What do they look like? What don't they look like, perhaps?
Well, what I get from a lot of coaches is like, oh, I do one-on-ones, but it's really informal. And I'm like, that's great. But like, there is a very big difference between you pulling a player aside and typically pull a player after practice because of what? Because there's been an issue, right? Are we pulling them aside just to be like, hey man, that was a phenomenal practice, or just really okay. But there's a whole other thing when a player knows they're on your calendar, they know you're on your schedule. We got to talk. I get to talk to coach at this time, or coach is on the bus. We got a 2-hour bus ride, and coach is going to talk to me and 5 other guys, and I'm going to have 15 minutes with coach. And coach has told me, hey, come to me with something you want to talk about. Like that's something big. Like come to me. Like, yeah, I got maybe a few things I want to talk to you about, but what is important? What do you want to talk about? And that's what I would encourage coaches start with. Hey, Johnny, what do you want to talk about today? What's on your mind? What can I help you with? And then maybe I got a few things as a coach as well too. So we like to document a lot of these things, like the progress and the development, just because it helps to hold the player accountable, helps to just nurture their growth in that. That's something, learned a lot from some of the pro teams that have been around. So that's been great. We like to document it, but we create checklists because here's the thing. I want at least one-on-one with every player in a program once a month. And some coaches will be like, well, how's that possible? I'm like, I had a client, basketball coach, 12 players on his team. He taught 6 classes. He's got 4 kids of his own. And yet he's like, okay, we've got 12 players. It's me and 2 assistants. They're part-time assistants, but we can all of us do 1 a week. If we do 1 a week, we get to every player once a month. and one a week sitting down 15 to 30 minutes, and you're fully committed, fully present to that athlete. And that right there, when you share that with parents that you're doing that, oh, game changer. Game changer for that athlete. Here's the only problem with this. This is the only problem. You're going to do that. If you do this, the feedback will be from your players. We want more one-on-ones, coach, next year. That they value it so much. This is constantly the feedback we get. So it's an absolute game changer. It's a incredible way to value players, especially players that aren't playing. How do you support players in roles that don't play a lot? Well, most players just want to know that you still care about them. Well, making 15 to 30 minutes for them once a week or once a month, whatever your cadence can be, that's a really powerful way to show them that you care.
It's awesome. It seems like a lot of times players just want to be heard. They want to be heard. And the one way to do that is to have this one-on-one kind of a format. I also as well, JP, I'm a believer that sometimes those one-on-one meetings are more powerful than having 15 minutes working on your fast break, 15 minutes working on the trap. I think there's more, sometimes more of a bigger long-term breakthrough with sitting down with the kid for 15 minutes. So some people are like, hey, I don't have the time for it because I have to be on the hardwoods for 2 hours and this is what I'm doing. Well, sometimes taking away from actual practice time to have the conversation can be much more of a breakthrough in my experience.
Absolutely. And I think when you look at, some of the challenges around mental health with today's athletes, what a lot of research would say is that, and this might be a little controversial, but there's a lot of research out there from people like Dr. Bruce Perry, who's the leading, trauma, trauma, and psychiatrist out there. He would say that more powerful for most individuals than therapy is just connection to a team and to other individuals. Just, they don't need to go to some professional in a room to get that connection. It's with just the adults and the people in their life. And so that's the power of great team cultures. That's the power of a great relationship with your athletes. That's the power of these one-on-ones, is you just sit down and you just listen. What's coming up for you? What's going on for you? What can I help you with? And that connection time, that does a lot for a kid, feeling, like you said, feeling seen, feeling known, and feeling loved.
We talked a little bit about, if we go back to the parents here, a few examples of including the parents. I think one thing you said was maybe a newsletter or an email. Talk to me a little bit about the gap between, there are a lot of parents out there who want to be involved, and maybe involved is, I just want to know what you're doing. I'm paying for you to do this sport and you're there for 2 or 3 hours. I just want to know what you're doing, not in an evasive way. So tell me a little bit about some of the best coaches you've been around. How do they include the parents in an appropriate way where it's not too much and the boundaries are still there? Is it in emails or something more? What are some of the strategies that you've seen where we can include the parents on some of this so we don't have any sort of enemies on one side of the boards or the other?
Well, we've seen it done a lot of different ways, and some of it's really radical and it would scare a few people. So I'll give you a few radical ones and a few more that most people can stomach. One is, Greg Tonigal of Indiana Wesleyan. He, amazing story. He's won multiple championships at the NAIA level at that college for basketball. And one day he's out mowing his lawn, and during the summer he's got this real player that he just can't get through, or he just can't seem to build a connection with. Not buying in, really does not like authority figures. And he's thinking about this kid, what he knows about him. He's like, man, this kid doesn't have a relationship with his father. Now, Donegal has a team retreat every summer with his players where they bring them out, they have great food, they have some adventures, and they, have a lot of time where they're, sitting around a campfire talking as a group. He's like, well, what if I just invited the dads? What would happen there? Like, what would that mean for that father? What would that mean for that son? What could that mean for their relationship? And then maybe that actually might help this individual reshape, his relationship with, authority figures and father figures in his life. It was game changer. And they've been doing it for the last 15 years. They've been having every summer, they have a father-son retreat. And the stories of transformation are just incredible in that experience. But you don't have to go to that level. Every coach, every level can do what we call the parent experience. And this is a way to transform your typical parent meeting. Everyone typically has that parent meeting to start the year. Well, start off with the parent experience, which is bring parents in to be a part of a practice. You can have the players coach the parents. You can have the coaches coach the parents. You can have the coaches coach the parents and the athletes with, you know, a little bit of competition between parents and athletes. I mean, it really does vary. I did with my 8-year-olds team just, 2 months ago. And it was just awesome. It was awesome for me as a parent, as a coach parent, because I was like, I got to know other parents better. I got to see parents having fun, laughing, getting after it. They got to, see how hard this sport is that they're yelling at their kids at from the sideline. So I've had swimming coaches do this. I've had track coaches do this. I've had basketball, lacrosse. We had a women's college lacrosse program. William Mary's Division I level did a parent experience event. And you just talk about unbelievable transformation. First off, they got to experience what it's like to go out there and practice on a Division I field and go through some of the drills. And then their kids get to spend time with their parents in ways that they don't usually get to. And just the joy on those kids' faces. And one girl who had just been through the toughest 3 years, battling an eating disorder, gets to go out there. And I mean, just a smile on her face, that coach said, and just the feedback, like she had not enjoyed her sport as much as she had in the last 3 years. I mean, it's just awesome stories like that. So it brings this moment that you bring the parents a little bit closer to the program and into the team experience and strengthen the connection. And then you come in and you deliver a message around, hey, this is our philosophy. This is how we do things here. This is what we're trying to achieve in your kid's life. And then you have that parent meeting and people are way more receptive to what you're doing. So that's how you kind of bring parents in to this thing is don't just go out there and deliver something that's very stale and mechanical, like, and go through your manual and your parent handbook. That's going to bore people. They won't pay attention. They're not going to feel a connection to that. But if you can do some sort of, parent experience and then sit down and communicate your why and tell the story about how you got into coaching and show your humanity, something they can connect with. Now we're humming, right? Now we're building that partnership that we want.
Do you see that being something that could be done not just one time in the preseason, but maybe if throughout the season, if there's a day that you want to give them off or coming on a Saturday, do you see it as something like, hey, it's not just a preseason? Because sometimes seasons are long as JP and we start to lose some of that touch. Is this something that you'd recommend sprinkling in throughout the year?
Yeah, it's one of the things I talk about in my book, the Sports Parent Solution, is like you got to establish that relationship, but then you got to support it throughout the year. And you got to be doing different things like that. I mean, I think some sort of event with parents. I mean, in fact, with my daughter's team, I mean, it was it was like middle of the year, right? Middle of the season. Now these girls are gonna be playing together for years to come, right? So it's like you said, it's it's a slow build. But I mean, we've done other amazing things to bring parents into it. I love parent appreciation night. Pick a game on your schedule and have some sort of thing where that week the athletes can appreciate the parents at their games. They can write up a thank you to them, or they can write them a thank you note. Maybe it's not even done. We've had coaches that do it publicly at games, where the parents come out or the parents stand up and there's something's read out about them. But one of the coolest things about the parent appreciation night or week is that we get the athletes sitting down and interviewing their parents, asking them questions around what it's like to be a parent, what are the challenges, why they want to be a parent, what have been some of their favorite memories, right? And then from that, they sit around and we have a conversation as a team around what makes our parents special. And then the players go off and they write these thank you letters or these bios, to kind of introduce their parents at halftime of the game. And it's just stuff like that, parent meals, trying to bring them into this stuff. The more we can bring them into the team experience at different times and appropriate times, the more opportunity they are going to be bought into what we're trying to do and be bought into the team and support the other kids because they actually have a relationship with those other kids and the other parents.
Yeah, I think it really just humanizes them, right? Like sometimes we see the coach as not a human for some reason. We see him as somebody who's out to get your kid, or we don't really know. Once you start to create a relationship with them, it kind of humanizes not only the coach, but it gets you to maybe instead of throwing blame at the coach when your kid comes home mad one day, maybe it's a little bit more empathy and you can kind of cross that bridge a little bit more carefully rather than just throwing the guy under the bus because you've created a little bit more of a foundation. It might not even be a lot, but just a little bit.
Oh, and that's probably the biggest thing. And that's where all this has to start. This whole solution starts with just our mindset and seeing people as people, seeing parents as people, and them getting to see us as people. And the fact that man, I'm an imperfect coach. I'm also an imperfect person. I'm a parent as well, and I'm imperfect at that. Holy crap, this job is hard, right? This job of parenting, and how are we supposed to navigate that? How are we supposed to navigate the relationship with their kid's coach? Because, well, my son or daughter really cares about this sport, and they want to be great, and they're not having any fun, and they're miserable, and they're disappointed. And how do I support them through that? And it's just the whole thing is just we're all very flawed human beings, and we're all just trying to figure it out. And if we can just connect around that very fact, you know, and then that, I think, paves the way for a lot of success.
As we're talking about coaches, one another delicate situation is when the coach is coaching their kids. So you're coaching your kids' team, and that can be really difficult because maybe your kid's one of the best kids on the team, or maybe they are, or maybe that doesn't even matter. But it can be really difficult when your kid is on the team when it leads to playing time, and it just seems like there could be a lot of issues that rise there. And then on the other side, it could be very difficult for you and your child. You're wearing two hats. You're wearing the hat of the coach and you're wearing the hat of being mom or dad. And I have several people that I'm friends with and work with that coach their kids. I would love to talk a little bit about what's the message to the coaches out there that are coaching their kids, whether it's on the court or they're having trouble kind of putting the other hat on, as difficult as that may be, JP.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I don't necessarily know that I have the answer. I think there's probably others that have better experience in this. And I think that, when you do, if you know people, if you have friends that have navigated that successfully, or find the mentors in there. But I would say the biggest thing I would recommend, is I've coached my own kids, is I first start from a place of, do you want me to coach you? And sitting down with your child, and asking them that question, and then saying, okay, what do you need from me for this to go well? What do you expect from me? Right. And then for us to communicate what we expect out of them, which is, in practice, in games, like, you're going to respect me as the coach. You're going to, you can call me coach. Like, I don't know, some people maybe prefer to be called coach than dad in those environments, or mom. But I would really sit down and get clear around what you expect from them. And then also, like, but at home, when you get in that car, like, what do they want in those moments? Do they need you to take off that coach hat? Probably need you to take that off, and put on the dad or mom hat right away. And that's probably what they're going to ask for. But, and also, really kind of set up those terms of, like, well, if they want you to be coach outside of the practices and games, how can they best initiate that, and give you that permission? Because I'm sure there's gonna be moments where, I want to coach them outside of the practices and games, right? And we want to encourage them in those ways. But I think we need to gain those permissions for when. So my biggest recommendation is sit down and have a conversation with your kids. And then I think in the parent meeting, I would definitely talk about the elephant in the room. And I would say, hey, this is honestly how I'm navigating this relationship with my son or my daughter. These are also my expectations of myself, my standards, that I'm not here to show favoritism towards my child, but I'm also not here to be extra hard on them. Like, I don't want to be that dad or that, that mom that does that as a coach. And so I would just say, just communicate your standards, and then say, hey, if you ever sense or feel that I'm moving away from that, I encourage any parent to please reach out to me, and to hold me accountable to those things. And we can have a conversation if you think I'm veering from those things, because I think that's a whole nother relationship we have to be attentive to, which is the perception around how I'm coaching my son or my daughter.
Totally. It's in my opinion that most kids quit sports because of the car ride home with mom or dad. And it's usually, in just again, from my limited experience, is that the parent wants to talk about the game and talk about what you did wrong. And they just want to keep talking about it. And more times than not, I watched that powerful video from I love to watch you play. I love to watch you play.com.
Mm.
The powerful
Yeah.
video. And all these kids are basically saying this, that like, my parents just talk too much. I can hear them from the stands and it's kind of embarrassing. And sometimes I just don't want to talk about the game. When you think about, when you're hearing and listening to me talk about the car ride home, what's the strategy there? Is it simply just asking, what do you need from me, JP? Or what would your recommendations be on that very delicate time? Emotions can still be high. on the car ride home, and that can really make or break how the kid is feeling. What are your thoughts?
I really truly think the I've even moved away from I love to watch you play with my kids, because some days I don't actually like to watch my kids play because they're not good or they don't play hard, right? Um, I really try to focus on affirming the good, and if I do like watching them play, I'll share that. But I'm gonna be honest, I'm not gonna tell my kid I love to watch them play and they just got absolutely drilled, you know, five, in every game. Like my daughter played this one, her first time out there for tennis matches. It was painful. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know if she learned anything in the first 6 months of tennis. She's horrible. And I just said to her, I said, because she was really down, I said, man, that was tough. That was tough for you. And I know it was tough for me to watch. I said, that stunk, didn't it? She's like, yeah. I was like, what do you want to do about it? He was like, do you want to keep playing tennis? She goes, yeah. I was like, okay, we'll keep doing this, like there was no motivational speech. It was just like, what do you want to do about it? How do you want to handle this adversity? So, I mean, sometimes there's going to be conversations that are needed, but I think other times it's just let them know, hey, I'm here if you want to talk. It would be my, just communication to my kids, and allowing them to communicate it. We also just need to be really self-reflective, and just really what's coming up for us as parents. Like what emotions come up when we see our kids score? What emotions come up when we see them play poorly? What emotions come up when we see and what's at stake for me in that? Is it my own pride? Is it really about my kid? Um, when our kids aren't working as hard as we want them to off the field or off the court, am I in a place now where I want them to be successful at this sport more than they do? And if that is the case, then I'm in a problem zone. And I have to really temper that. I think too, I mean, I've heard parents say, well, to their kids, well, you said you wanted this. You said you wanted to be the next level. Like, that doesn't necessarily mean that they actually really want it more than like I really think that. And I think we got to allow kids to give up on dreams. I really do think, like, I think dreams are great. I think we need to pursue them, but I think we also need to remember and just walk the journey with them and remind them that they do have a choice. They have a choice in this, and they don't need to continue to pursue that dream to make us proud. That's not a safe place to be, and I've experienced that as myself as an athlete.
I want to take it just one layer further when we're talking about the coach and their parent, or sorry, the player and their parents. Something else I'll hear when I'm spending time with kids is that they firmly believe, and it breaks my heart a little bit even to say this, but they believe that the better they play, the more my mom or dad will love me. If I score 30, they're excited, they love me more, they talk to me more. And loaded question here, JP, but for the parents out there listening, because it's not the kids that are going to be able to make the change on this, for the parents out there, how can they make sure that their kid knows that they love them, whether they score 30 or they're warming the bench? Is it as simple as just saying that statement because they're not assuming that they know? Is this something you've experienced? Is this something you've heard before as well?
Yeah, I think it's so much of our response or our reaction when they play poorly, when things don't go well, and I think it's also our response when things do go well and they achieve. And I think it's the more that we offer praise, we focus on the outcomes for when things go well or they don't go well. Our attention is there, then the more they're likely to feel they have to prove themselves. They have to perform for our approval. And we need to focus. If we're not focusing on the outcomes, what are we focusing on? We're focusing on the behaviors. And if they do well, it's pointing back to, hey, I'm really proud of how you were as a teammate, how all your work ethic, all your work this summer to accomplish that, to earn that reward. And if they don't do well, can we still focus on the behaviors? Can we, what did they do well in those moments? Or if they didn't do anything, they didn't play hard, like there's a reality there too. It's just if they ask for our feedback, to share that and be like, oh, I just don't think you're like, I'm not disappointed that you didn't play. I'm not disappointed that you played poorly. I like, honestly, I just think in a day, like, you haven't been attending the workouts all off season, or you haven't put the extra work in. Like, I think those types of things we can be honest with our kids about the behavior stuff. But to let our disappointment in the outcomes come to the surface, I don't think that's necessarily healthy. And I would just offer parents to this, but give yourself a bit of grace. My dad was a great sports dad. He loved basketball. but he never forced it on us. But when I love basketball and he loved basketball, we shared that passion and it brought us close. And there's just it's the natural human evolution, the way our brains work. We want to do well for other people's approval. And there's my dad, could have done a million different ways that approached it a million different ways as a parent, but I still probably would have want to walk away, wanted to make him proud. Now I knew he always loved me. I mean, and I think there's a difference between that, right? So I think like he did a good job of just accepting folks in the behaviors. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, I'm almost 40 and I haven't played basketball since I was 20 when I was at the University of South Carolina as a walk-on there. But I was out watching a basketball game the other day or a practice, and I was, it was actually a game that I was consulting on, visiting, doing some observations of some coaches and doing some work with their teams. And there's this one player out there, and he kind of reminded me of myself, but he could dunk a lot better than I ever could. I was like, man, I wish I could dunk like that back in the day. My dad would have been so psyched. Like I literally thought that, oh man, my dad would have been proud of me. So like, here I am all these years later, and yeah, I still think about making my dad proud with how I played the game, and with the energy I played with and the things I could do. So I don't think we ever move away from that. So I just give yourself some grace as a parent too. You're not going to be perfect, and I don't think there is a perfect.
Another issue I wanted to bring up to you is as we get into more of the culture conversation, and again, speaking more for youth athletics here, because I think when you get to college, you can kind of recruit and find the people that you want. But when you're in youth and you're in JV and varsity, it's kind of whoever just shows up. I'm curious, what's the conversation like with coaches who find themselves caring more than the kids do? They're putting in all this work and all this effort and all this coaching extra hours, and it just seems like either the kids don't care or the kids don't care as much as the coaches. And because of that, there's just this little bit of a shift where why do we care more than you guys care? What's the conversation like with coaches who are struggling in a culture like that?
Our expectations. Our expectations as coaches. I mean, it's just, this is the reality. I don't know of a program out there where the players care more than the coaches. I really just don't. I mean, you might be in New England, 10 years ago, and Tom Brady maybe cared just as much as Bill Belichick, but you wouldn't say that about all the Patriots,
Mm.
Even at the pro level, right? So I think just there's something about the coach role where we feel this greater responsibility to the team, the team's success, and it will always be that way for most coaches. And coaches are more likely to get fired if they do not perform, if the team doesn't perform, whereas players are less likely to get fired when the team performs, right? So there's that element. So I think it's a bit of dropping some of our expectations. I used to always say, like, as leaders, we must be prepared to give twice as much as we expect from others. I mean, I think that's a bit of servant leadership. It doesn't mean we lower and drop our standards in this massive way. It just means that we we have to drop a little bit of our expectations and take a different approach. And so I think the real thing is, how do we get kids to care more?
Yeah.
Well, do we do it from an extrinsic way? Well, we can get them to care from offering rewards, selling them on scholarships and this or that, or we could use this, the old stick and use the physical punishments, the conditioning, the yelling, the screaming, all that. I don't want players that work hard or that care a lot, right? I don't think they really care, but they do the things I want them to do because I told them to do it, or because they are afraid if they don't, that they're going to have to experience some sort of, punishment from me, or even just some reward. Like, I want players to work hard, do the right thing, and care, because that's the type of person they want to be, and they know it's going to lead to their success.
Right.
And so if we can work backwards from their goals, what are their goals for the team? What are their individual goals? And this is what the player one-on-ones are all about. What are your goals? Where do you want to go? Who do you want to be as a team, as an athlete? Okay, that's where you want to go. Where are you now? Where are you currently in relation to those goals, those outcomes? Where are we as a team? Okay, so we've mapped out where we want to go, where we want to be. Now, what do you have to do? What are some things you can do to close the gap from where you are to where you want to be? And it's about having these conversations almost every day with our team. And so we do this in individual one-on-ones. We do this when we co-create team standards. We say, okay, this is the goals that we have for our team. This is the experience we want to have when we pursue those things. What are we going to do to achieve those goals and to create that experience? And we give it back to the players. And here's the crazy thing, coaches, they will set higher standards than you probably thought you could get away with yourself setting. And then you start to come in and say, hey, you guys said you cared about winning a championship. You said you cared about having a team that loved each other and cared about each other. We're not doing the things you said you needed to do. And so you just come back to those standards, but they've set them. And you help to nurture that intrinsic motivation, that intrinsic care for the team, for the experience, for the goal.
That was a big aha moment for me just now, JP, for you to say that in most organizations, the coach does care more than the kid. I mean, I haven't even thought of that before, right? But they have more pressure in professional ranks. And so that's actually pretty normal. Where I think what I was thinking was the kids should care as much as the coaches. Am I hearing you saying that correctly? That's not how it should be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think as coaches, we probably need to care a little less. Mm. Our relationship with winning, with success, is for most of us, gets to the point where it's pretty unhealthy. We need to care. We need to win. We need to want that desire. But so often for us as coaches, we sacrifice our families. We sacrifice the things that are most important. We sacrifice relationships with athletes because we're not willing to meet them where they're at in this process. And we need to care a little less, just a little less, right? And I would say this, and some people might say, well, you're crazy. That's what makes Bill Belichick who he is and so successful. I'm like, okay, that's fine. And this is not a criticism of the Belichicks of the world, but I'm just going to say, well, I'd rather be a Dungy with 1 than Belichick with 6. I just an external look on the situation, the life and the fulfillment. I'm going to go like, do I need 6? Michael Jordan, great player, best player of all time, doesn't look very fulfilled at the end of the day. Right. And I'm using these people as general, right. And there's not real criticisms of them, but I think we just use those as general kind of metaphors for what we're driving at here. We just need to care a little less, still care a lot. And then once we start to care a little less and we start to bring the players into this process, we might actually start to find that we're getting pretty close there to that. Hey, we all care equally, but I still think we'll care more.
I like the idea of lowering expectations a little bit, but also making sure the standard stays high. Because I think what could happen is if we lower our expectations, we could also easily lower those standards. And then it kind of just becomes this free for all, and things can really start to spiral downhill with both of those go down. So can you talk to me a little bit about why you still need to keep one up and what that looks like?
Yeah, this is really good. Really good. So what's the difference between these words and all that? I mean, like at the end of the day, expectations are my non-negotiables as a coach. I talk about that in the book, The Culture System. This is the baseline. This is your price of entry. Okay. These are literally non-negotiable. I'm going to hold them to it all the time. My standards are, I'm striving for my standards. When I meet with teams, what I often do when I facilitate is we talk about what we want, vision and goals, but then we go and we do an activity and we talk about practices, games. We often talk about life in those areas, and we have athletes go around and they really start to identify what do we not tolerate, and then get really specific behaviors in there. What do we expect is above that? What do we strive for? So an example in like a practice setting could be, we don't tolerate tearing down teammates or harshly criticizing our, harsh self-talk. We expect everyone to receive feedback. We strive for giving feedback in a constructive manner, right? We get really clear on those standards in that format. So here we go. We're striving for standards. We expect these things. That's the difference. So it's really important to recognize this is the price of entry, but we know that we're going to work. We know our job as coaches is to develop your work ethic, is to develop your ability to respond to adversity. So often coaches will tell me, man, like my whole thing is, guys can make mistakes, they can drop a pass, they can do this, but like I just do not tolerate bad attitudes or not working hard. And I'm like, all right, first off, attitude and effort are very relative to individuals. Okay. Like we could both watch TV and watch a sporting event. You could say that guy's working hard or that guy's a great attitude. And I could be like, I think it's a horrible attitude, right? Like it just looks different, right? So it's all, first off, it's relative. And secondly, those things are character skills. Skill takes time to develop. It takes coaching to develop. That's our freaking job, right? So our job is not just to teach them how to catch a football or shoot a basketball or swing a baseball bat. Our job is to help them develop skills that will last them through life. And I think all of us as coaches know that. We just forget that.
And that's good stuff. I want to go back to one more question. I had some coaches kind of file in and tell me some questions to ask you. And one of the coaches said, what would you say, JP, about somebody who is coaching and they're dealing with either parents or media or people saying that I have favorites. I play my favorites. And there's this favoritism game. Going back a little bit, and maybe it's similar. That's what we already touched on. So I apologize if it's a similar answer. But what's the advice to the coach that's getting blamed for playing his favorite kid?
Yeah, I've seen a few different approaches on this. The one is like, I do have favorites. I've seen coaches take that approach and be like, this is what we look for in people that we're going to play more, right? So identify what about these other players helps to contribute to their playing more. Necessarily don't even have to name names, just like these are the things that we're looking for. And in the case of a parent, with your son or daughter's behaviors, like we're not seeing a lot of those things and we could see more of those and we've communicated them to them. Okay. So one is just to really focus on the behaviors that lead someone to be more favorite. Then the second thing I would encourage coaches to do is, but to be curious, stay curious, as your sign says in the back there, right? Stay curious. Before I even share that, start with curiosity and go, can you tell me more about what I am doing that leads you to believe I'm playing favorites? And if it's just, well, you're playing this player some more, okay. No, is there something around my behaviors or something doing is the way that I'm communicating? And so often the favoritism thing, like in a basketball sense, is, well, Johnny can turn the ball over 5 times, but my son turns it over once and he's out. Well, we talk about the value equation. And this is like an athlete's value on the court, different than their value off the court. Their athlete's value on the court, there's the positive and negative. And Johnny has this upside. He can score 30. Your kid would probably have to shoot 100 shots to score 20, right? So, there's this upside. Johnny can get away with more because he has this bigger upside. Your son or daughter's role has to be come in here, take care of the ball, because there's not a lot of upside on that. So we try to explain that as well too, around the favoritism. But I really would start with a place of curiosity. Say, hey, enlighten me. Tell me, what is it that I'm doing that's showing favoritism? And ask a lot of curious questions and be open to the fact that you may actually be playing favorites a little bit, right? I think I've played favorites over the years. I didn't think so in the moment. There would be times where I would create labels and judgments in my head about an athlete. And then I would go into a practice and I would be looking for evidence to support my judgment. And I would completely ignore these players and what they would be doing. And I would pick on certain guys. That's a reality, right? And some coaches might defend their behavior with, well, they did this or that, which is giving me this, this belief, like, I don't know. I just really think we got to be open to the fact that we could be playing favorites as well.
I love the idea of leading with questions. I also think there's something to you and I, it's probably very obvious, but to some parents, it might not be. JP, when's the best time to approach a coach? When's the worst time to approach a coach?
As a coach, and I encourage coaches to use the 24-hour rule frame, not just you have to wait 24 hours before you can contact me so that you can cool off. It's like, so that I can cool off. Like I'll come out of a game and I'll be, hot as well, especially if we didn't play well. I think the my encouragement is, if you want to have a conversation, please reach out and we can set up a time. Um, if it can wait, please give it 24 hours before we reach out, because even text or call or email can just come in and not have the right tone. Sometimes things have to be addressed a little before that, but I really don't like phone conversations. I definitely don't like text back and forth. And so it's just really like, hey, I'm happy to have a conversation, but we need to sit down in person. And that's a really important piece.
Cool. I want to close down with, we're talking about the sports parent solution here. Kind of a fun question. I didn't cue you up or tee you up on this, but I like this idea of red flags, right? So there's, in relationships, there's like red flags out there that if you see this, you probably should steer clear. I wanted to frame a question of, for the parents out there, JP, in your experience, what are like 4 to 6 red flags of, it's like, hey, if you're doing this, probably shouldn't be doing this anymore. And I don't think there's anything that's too obvious. And you can kind of have some fun with this if you want, but we can't change that we're not aware of. So I'd just be curious to kind of hear you say about 5 or 6 red flags for parents specifically. If you're doing this, maybe consider not doing it.
Yeah. If you're more excited than your kids after a win, or you're more disappointed after a loss than your kids, then you might be that sports parent. Um, if you ever send a coach an email that starts with, I'm not that sports parent, or I've tried to hold my tongue as long as I can, well, you've now become that sports parent. you know I think those are some red flags. If you don't know anything about your coach outside of the fact that he's your child's coach, right? If you don't like you should probably get to know him more as a person, as a human being, or her as a person and a human being. So I would really encourage knowing and getting to know them. Those would be a few red flags. If you're packing your kid's bag for practice, if you're having to do all those little things that they need to be able to learn to do themselves, to be self-sufficient, I think that's a bit of a red flag there. I think my 6-year-olds, like, I have a rule: don't do anything you can for your kids they can do for themselves, right? Like that's something I really try to enforce with myself. So that would be a red flag. I would say a yellow flag is if you find yourself saying, hey, I just want to provide every opportunity I can for them. My parents, the best thing they did was they said, hey, you want to go to this camp? You're going to work and do some summer jobs to help pay for it. Right. I think the more we can get our kids to have some skin in the game, the more likely they're going to be intrinsically motivated. I also think one more yellow flag is if we treat practice and playing as a got to, right? Like, well, they got to be there so they can get the scholarship. They got to do that because we paid all this money. No, like, sports are a privilege. Practice is an opportunity to get better. And when your kids don't do their homework, or they don't do the chores, or they're not treating you with respect, or their brothers or sisters with respect, they should lose that opportunity and privilege. And that for me in my life changed my life. It changed basketball. I was super motivated because my parents made me put some effort into some of those opportunities. And secondly, when I didn't make the grades, I lost the opportunity to to be there. They didn't yell or scream or beg or plead for me to make the grades. I was just like, that's it. Like, you didn't make the grades. We know you are capable. And they supported me through that. They still sat down to help me get my grades up. But like, those were some big life-changing moments. So when we treat sports as a got to instead of a get to, then I think we're training a lot of the wrong mindsets with our young athletes.
That's awesome, man. Great advice. The last quote I want to just get in here from your Twitter said this: why are kids playing Fortnite? Because they're having fun. Why is sports participating declining? Because they're not having fun. It's simple. It's not because they're lazy, entitled, or don't want to. So what can we learn from this? Make sports fun again.
Yeah. Geez, that's an old tweet there. But I know it really hit a nerve with a lot of people. and maybe it just got a lot of retweets because a lot of people were also pissed off by it. I think that's what social media does sometimes. I think you have to say something a little controversial, but so maybe there is some controversy in that. I think for me, we have tried to control the athlete experience so much for the sake of optimization. We want to optimize everything about the athlete experience to get them to the top. And for what? Like, even if they get to the top, like, is that really providing a life that's filled with fulfillment and joy and meaning? Maybe, right? But it's more about it's more about the pursuit there. And so what can we do to make this experience more enjoyable? And enjoyable sometimes means hard. It doesn't mean it's not hard. But I would say the number one thing that we can do is probably focus a little less on our sport and more on the team culture. And most athletes, like I look at our local football club here in Ireland where I live, and the team with the age group with the most athletes, they do the most things together off the field. They have 80 girls in their age group. 80. Most teams in our club have 30.
Wow.
But they've been able to maintain high numbers. And I was at a meeting last night, and the coach is like, "Well, we've already got these 5 events planned this year," and everyone's like, "We don't even have one planned."
Wow.
All right, so it's more off the field, off the court stuff that I think will really create a fun experience, and that 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 that's why video games have taken off too. Like, I think it's because there's a community aspect to it, right? It's not just because they've gotten better at creating games that feed that parts of the brain that need to be. It's because we've created a sense of community, and I think that's the real thing that the video game industry has capitalized on.
Great point. JP, a lot of wisdom today. Thank you for your time, man. How can my listeners best support you?
I mean, just by supporting themselves and their coach development, or their parent development. I think the Sports Parent Solution speaks to parents as well. So check out the Sports Parent Solution. You can read that all. Well, you don't need to have read the prior book. It's kind of a sequel to the Culture System, which has been a huge bestseller and really resonated with a lot of coaches out there and been really helpful. So you can check out the Culture System. They're all available now on Audible. They're also on Amazon and Apple Books. You can go to my website, tocculture.com, and I've got online courses there around the playing time system. I've got an online course on it's kind of 3-tier course on transformational coaching and culture building as well too, that could serve just yourself as a coach, or it's great for clubs, programs, athletic departments. You can train up all your coaches on really practical leadership concepts for culture building. So there's just some online courses there and stuff. You can reach out to me if you want to connect through my website, tocculture.com.
JP, thanks again for your time, man. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. Great conversation, great questions, and appreciate you.